Have you ever had one of those neighbors who think they own the whole world? You know, the type, loud, bossy, always sticking their nose where it doesn't belong. Well, let me tell you about my neighbor Karen, who wasn't just any ordinary Karen. She was the president of our HOA, and she truly believed she had the right to control everyone's life around her. But here's the twist. Her arrogance ended up destroying everything she had. And when I say everything, I mean her $1 million mansion crumbling to the ground after a massive flood. But before that unbelievable moment, let me take you back to where it all began. When she cut down my fence without permission. At first glance, my property wasn't anything fancy. I owned a nice home with a decent yard and, most importantly, a solid wooden fence that had been there for years. That fence wasn't just wood and nails. It was my privacy, my safety, and my way of keeping the outside chaos away from my peaceful life. But to Karen, that fence was an obstruction. She claimed it blocked her beautiful view of the hills from her massive mansion up the road. Can you believe that? My fence on my property suddenly became a problem because she thought she deserved a picture-perfect view 24/7. Now, I've always believed in minding my own business. I never bothered anyone, and I certainly never tried to tell anyone else how to live. But Karen was different. She thrived on control. She loved sending HOA violation letters for the smallest things, like someone leaving their trash can out a few hours too long, or having flowers that weren't uniform enough of community standard. And while she enjoyed bossing everyone else around, she thought the rules didn't apply to her. That's where the story takes its first shocking turn. One morning, I walked outside and froze in disbelief. My fence, the fence that had stood strong for years, was gone. Not damaged, not leaning, but completely gone. Wooden panels were piled up on the side of the road like trash, and the posts had been yanked out of the ground. At first, I thought maybe the city or utility workers had made a mistake. But no. Standing right there, with her smug smile and sunglasses, was Karen. "You're welcome," she said, as if she had done me a favor. "Excuse me," I replied, trying to process what I was seeing. That fence was ugly. It blocked the neighborhood view. I had the HOA approve its removal. Now everyone can enjoy the scenery. I was speechless. She hadn't just crossed a line. She had bulldozed right over it. That fence wasn't just ugly. It was mine. I paid for it. I maintained it, and it stood on my property line. Karen had no legal right to touch it, but in her world, she thought she could do whatever she pleased. At first, I felt anger boiling inside me. But instead of screaming, I asked the obvious question. "So, you think you could just take down someone's property without asking?" Karen smirked. "Not think, dear." I did. And trust me, the neighborhood is better for it. Besides, if you want to put it back up, you'll need HOA approval, and let's just say that might take a while. She walked off like she had just won a battle. But little did she know, this wasn't a battle. It was the start of a war. Here's the thing about people like Karen. They believe they're untouchable. They think money, status, and power will protect them forever. But karma doesn't forget addresses. And in her case, karma came in the form of Mother Nature herself. After the fence fiasco, I decided not to immediately rebuild. Part of me wanted to prove a point, but part of me was also waiting, because something strange was happening near Karen's property. You see, her mansion wasn't just big. It was built on land that had a history of flooding. Older neighbors used to talk about the valley below turning into a river whenever heavy rains came. That's why my fence was so important. It acted as a small barrier that slowed down the flow of water across my land. Without it, the soil shifted more easily, and runoff began heading straight toward Karen's house. Of course, she didn't see it that way. She thought she was invincible, sitting in her glass-wall mansion perched at the top of the hill. But as weeks turned into months, the weather started to change. Storm warnings were issued. The ground was already soaked from previous rains, and everyone knew a big one was coming. Everyone except Karen. She was too busy throwing parties, bragging about her unobstructed view, and making sure no one dared plant anything too tall in their yards. The night it happened still gives me chills. Thunder rolled across the sky like cannons, and sheets of rain hammered down on the neighborhood. Roads turned into streams, and the ground vibrated under the force of the storm. I remember standing at my window, watching as water rushed across my yard where the fence used to stand. Normally, the fence would have slowed it, forcing water to spread out more evenly. But now, it was like a direct funnel pointing straight downhill, straight toward Karen's mansion. The lights in her house flickered as the storm raged. I could hear sirens in the distance, and neighbors scrambled to protect their homes. But Karen, she refused to evacuate. She believed nothing could touch her palace. Then the ground gave way. It started small, a rumble, a crack. But within minutes, the soil under her mansion began sliding. Walls trembled, glass shattered, and before anyone could fully react, a massive section of her home collapsed into the flood below. The mansion that once towered over everyone, the symbol of her arrogance, was now crumbling in pieces, swallowed by mud and water. The very thing she mocked me for, the fence she destroyed, had been her only line of defense. Without it, the flood had a clear path to her property, and nature didn't hesitate to take what was hers. Standing there in the storm, watching the chaos unfold, I realized something. Karma has a way of balancing the scales. Karen thought she had power, but in the end, she was powerless against the forces she tried to control. And as the neighborhood gathered the next morning to see the wreckage, whispers spread like wildfire. Everyone knew exactly why it happened. Everyone remembered the fence. And for the first time, Karen had no comeback, no smug remark, no HOA rulebook to hide behind. She was silent. Sometimes life doesn't need you to fight back. Sometimes you just let karma do the talking. But here's the real question. Was it the end of the story, or was it just the beginning? Because while Karen's mansion may have collapsed, the aftermath of her actions was far from over. Backhand index pointing right if you're ready to see how this story takes an even darker, more shocking turn. Stick around for part 2, because trust me, you won't believe what happened next. You might think the story ended the night Karen's mansion collapsed. After all, what more could possibly happen after a $1 million home comes crashing down in a flood? But here's the thing. When you're dealing with someone like Karen, the drama never ends with just one disaster. If anything, that flood was only the beginning of a chain reaction that shook the entire neighborhood and exposed secrets nobody saw coming. The morning after the storm, people gathered in shock. Some were whispering, some were filming, and others were just standing there with their jaws dropped. Karen's mansion, the pride of the HOA, the house she bragged about endlessly, now looked like a war zone. Mud covered the driveway. Half the walls were gone, and furniture floated in filthy water. It was hard to believe that only 24 hours earlier, she had been showing off her perfect view. And there she was, Karen, standing in the middle of it all, drenched, covered in mud, screaming at contractors, neighbors, and even rescue crews. She wasn't thankful to be alive. She wasn't humble. Instead, she pointed her finger at everyone else. "This is your fault," she shouted. "If you people had maintained the drainage systems, if the HOA had enforced stricter codes, and then she turned to me, if he hadn't built that ridiculous fence years ago, this never would have happened." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The very fence she destroyed was now somehow the cause of her misery? Her logic was twisted, but that's how Karen worked. In her world, she was always the victim, never the villain. The crowd went silent, but you could feel the anger rising. People weren't by her excuses anymore. For years, she had terrorized neighbors with fines, threats, and constant harassment. She had made people repaint houses, replace mailboxes, and even cut down trees they loved, just to fit her idea of perfection. And now, she wanted us to feel sorry for her. No one was falling for it. But Karen wasn't done. No, she was just getting started. Within a week, lawsuits started flying. She filed one against the city for poor drainage systems. She filed another against the HOA, even though she was its president, claiming they hadn't protected her property. And the boldest move of all, she tried to sue me, yes, me, for creating a water trap with my old fence design. When I got the papers, I almost laughed. My fence, the one she tore down without permission, now it was somehow responsible for her $1 million disaster? It was so ridiculous that even the lawyer who served the papers looked embarrassed. But here's the part Karen didn't expect. When you spend years bullying people, you don't build allies, you build enemies. And when the time comes, those enemies don't stay quiet. Neighbors began speaking out. People dug up old emails, violation letters, and shady HOA decisions. It turned out Karen had been bending the rules for herself for years. She forced people to follow strict codes, but secretly approved her own exceptions. She built extra structures without permits, ignored safety warnings, and even redirected part of the neighborhood drainage system so water flowed away from her property toward ours. Suddenly, her mansion collapse didn't look like bad luck. It looked like karma and negligence rolled into one. The lawsuit she filed against me backfired in the best way possible. My lawyer barely had to argue. All he did was show the court a single fact. The fence was mine, legally built, and torn down without my consent. And who tore it down? Karen. The judge didn't even need a full day to dismiss her claim. She had destroyed her own line of protection, and the flood had done the rest. But the real fireworks started when the HOA itself came under investigation. With Karen's downfall, members finally had the courage to come forward. Stories poured out, thousands of dollars in fines that mysteriously disappeared, contracts given to her friends, community funds used to pay for upgrades to her mansion. It was like pulling a thread on a sweater. The more investigators pulled, the faster everything unraveled. By now, Karen's reputation was in ashes, but she still tried to cling to her old self. She marched into HOA meetings like nothing had happened, trying to bark orders and shut people down. The problem was, no one was listening anymore. Instead, neighbors shouted back. They demanded accountability. And when the final vote came, Karen was officially removed as HOA president. The power she loved so much was stripped away in a single meeting. I'd love to say she walked away quietly, but you already know that's not how Karen operated. She screamed, threatened to sue again, even called people traitors. But this time, no one feared her. She was just noise in the background, drowning in the mess she created. Here's the part that really hit me, though. A few weeks after the collapse, I was out walking my dog near the wreckage of her mansion. Karen was there, standing alone, staring at what was left of her empire. For the first time, she didn't look powerful. She didn't look smug. She just looked lost. And in that moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because the truth is, life had given her every chance to do better. She could have been a fair leader. She could have respected people's property. She could have built friendships instead of enemies. But she chose pride, greed, and control. And in the end, it wasn't me or the neighbors or even the HOA that destroyed her. It was herself. The mansion was eventually condemned. The land, once the crown jewel of the neighborhood, was declared unsafe for rebuilding. Karen had to move out, selling what was left for pennies compared to its worth. And as for me, I rebuilt my fence, stronger than ever, with full legal approval this time. Every time I look at it, I can't help but smile. Not because Karen lost, but because I learned something powerful. When people try to take what's yours, stand your ground. Because the truth always comes out one way or another. And if you're sitting there thinking, wow, this sounds like something out of a movie, trust me, it was very real. It taught me that sometimes you don't need revenge, because karma has a way of showing up right on time. So let me ask you, if you had a neighbor like Karen, someone who tore down your property and tried to ruin your life, how would you handle it? Would you fight back, or would you let karma do the heavy lifting like I did? Backhand index pointing right, drop your answer in the comments. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you want more unbelievable real-life stories like this one. Because trust me, I've got plenty more where this came from.